Bien, bonjour mesdames et messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying up until this late hour, and I'd like to report to you on the conclusions of this meeting. We had some important exchanges. I mentioned it this morning when I arrived, for the future of our Europe in terms of support for Ukraine, our next multi-annual financial framework, future enlargements of the European Union and the reforms it must carry out, and our relationship with our main trading partners, as well as issues linked to the EU-Mercosur agreement and agriculture. There was a lot to talk about at this board meeting, so I'll try to summarize the main decisions here. First, on Ukraine, in the intense diplomatic sequence underway. We reaffirmed our commitment to a just and lasting peace, with robust security guarantees that respect Europe's interests. And I welcome the decision taken last week to secure the long-term immobilization of Russian sovereign assets frozen in European Union jurisdictions. This decision, taken last Friday, enables Europe to retain one of its main negotiating levers. The aim of this European Council was to give Ukraine a higher profile. We spoke to President Zelensky this morning about the financial support the Union can provide in the short term for 2026 and 2027, ahead of important discussions with the International Monetary Fund. After lengthy discussions, we have decided on a price for Ukraine of €90 billion over the next 2 years, based on a European Union loan guaranteed by the European budget. These Eurobonds for Ukraine are a major step forward, giving visibility to our Ukrainian friends and coherence to our support. This solution appeared to be the most realistic and feasible to ensure that Ukraine would have the resources it needs to finance its war effort by 2026. We have taken care to introduce a robust European preference for our defense industry and that of Ukraine. At the same time, the Council was invited to continue technical work on the option of a reparation loan to be financed by cash income from frozen Russian sovereign assets. On Mercosur, I was able to reiterate this morning, as I have done over the past few weeks, that the agreement was not acceptable as it stood, and that there was no room for improvement. As for the conditions we had always set, it was therefore inconceivable that we should seek to force a decision in the Council to authorize the signing of this agreement, when our demands had not yet been met. After difficult discussions, we succeeded in postponing this decision and therefore the summit, which was initially scheduled for the day after tomorrow. And we must continue the work that has been underway for months. As I said this morning when I arrived, we're not there yet, and the text is unacceptable, which is why we've been able to postpone it. Now we're going to keep on working. We have begun to obtain a robust safeguard clause that will act as an emergency brake to protect our agricultural sectors. This safeguard clause was strengthened by the European Parliament, incorporating proposals from European agricultural unions. We now want it to be definitively recorded and to complete the agreement by being accepted by the Mercosur countries. This step is essential if it is to be a real safeguard clause. We also demanded reciprocity, because we cannot accept that products imported from third countries should not be subject to the same standards as those imposed on our producers. So we want what we call mirror measures, particularly on animal feed and pesticides, otherwise it's not fair. Otherwise, we're imposing rules on our producers that we don't impose on importers. The Commission has begun to respond with a proposal on food safety. We're waiting for the actual decisions in January, and we had technical discussions again this afternoon, after 12 p.m., which are moving in the right direction. And for months we have been calling for a European health protection force. This has been a constant demand from France for several years, with tighter veterinary and phytosanitary controls on imported products. The Commission has announced that all these measures will be put in place from January, so we're waiting for them to be implemented in early January and for these commitments to be effective. I'll say it again today, we're not there yet, and we need these advances to change the nature of the text, so that we can talk about another agreement with these safeguard clauses. With this reciprocity and control, we can protect our farmers, our food sovereignty and the food safety of Europeans. This is also why, along with Italy, Poland, Ireland and several other partners, we have asked the Commission to provide guarantees that our farmers' incomes will be maintained in the future cap of the Union's next multi-annual budget. In this context of uncertainty, with so many difficulties due to the vagaries of the weather, which increase the number of epizootics like those we are currently experiencing in France and in other European countries, we can't leave our farmers in limbo.
It's about Ukraine. Ultimately, this means almost €90 billion for the Ukraine. I understand that only 24 countries will be taking part. Does it worry you to see this base of support for Kyiv finally shrinking?
On aid to Ukraine, yes, there's a real break with this decision. For the first time, we agreed to borrow together to lend to Ukraine. It gives visibility, magnitude, and this, in any case with this mechanism, because we've already had several financial mechanisms that enabled us to lend. This is a major step forward. This decision was taken unanimously. Then there's a mechanism to protect 3 countries from the financial impact, and therefore from their share of the contribution in the long term. If, in the end, etc., 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 etc. All the consequences is an opt-out mechanism with which we are very familiar and which we have already used on several occasions, particularly during the financial crisis, and which has been effected. In fact, from memory, I think I can say that Slovakia benefited from mechanisms for Greece and the UK, for sure. So these are familiar mechanisms. When there are political disagreements, it allows us to go beyond them. Does this have any impact, given the 3 countries we're talking about? No, it doesn't make any financial difference. What would have been worrying is if he had intellectually. What would have been worrying is if one country had wanted to block. And I think what's really important is that you were unanimous in your decision. So I see it as a sign of confidence and solidity.
2 questions. Why haven't we managed to reach an agreement on the use of Russian fixed assets, or at least on the income they generate? You mention international law, but in concrete terms, who has blocked this? Was it you? Was it Orban? Did Belgium worry about the consequences under international law of using the assets? And the second question at this point is whether you think it would be useful to talk to Vladimir Putin.
On your first question, there was a very long debate. First of all, there is a great deal of technical work involved, and I would like to pay tribute to the commitment of the Belgian and German commissions, which have produced a very detailed text. This text rightfully raised many questions in several member states, of a very different nature in terms of the potential risks it posed to financial structures, governments, and financial stability. I'm not going to list them all here, but behind this technical solution, despite all the work that's been done, there were questions that remained. That wasn't my role. My role was rather to try to find a path and preserve this dual path. But obviously, we all had a lot of questions. But France was not at all a blocking factor in the progress of this technical solution. I would say the 2 technical solutions that the Commission had put on the table. And in the end, we've come away from this meeting with a great deal of consistency. One of the technical solutions proposed by the Commission is retained and implemented immediately, and work continues on the other. It's unprecedented, it's very complicated, and we're right to ask all these questions. So I think we have to respect all the countries that have raised legitimate questions, and these will be the subject of work by the Council, in conjunction with the Commission and the European Central Bank, to remove the uncertainties and try to move forward along this path. But this is obviously an extremely technical subject. That's why there's been so much debate over the last few weeks and hours. It would have been a failure if we had stopped there. And I think we've made the right decision, which is to say we've got to get on with it. We are consolidating the immobilization of assets, and above all we are taking an immediate decision tonight, because we don't want to wait, and we have promised Ukraine visibility. And we're taking this decision with the joint borrowing to finance this effort and the 90 billion. So that, I think, is a good way to go. Your second question. How difficult is it today to talk to Vladimir Putin? I think it will be useful to talk to Vladimir Putin again. Yes. In any case, I see that there are people who talk to Vladimir Putin. So I think that we Europeans and Ukrainians have an interest in finding the framework to re-engage in this discussion in due form. Otherwise, we talk to each other with negotiators who go alone to talk to the Russians. This is not optimal. So I think we need to finish the session, if I may say so, in progress. Discussions will take place in the next few hours to see what progress has been made. There's a cycle underway, a robust, lasting peace, with all the guarantees required, can be achieved. Formidable. And in any case, at that point we'll get round the table with everyone. Either we must continue to finance, engage, resist and help Ukraine. In the coming weeks, we will also have to find ways and means for the Europeans, in the right organization, to re-engage in full dialogue with Russia, in full transparency and in association with Ukraine.
First of all, is there a timeline for the further discussions about the Russian assets? And do you have a deadline that you would like to see on that? And second of all, there were high expectations for this summit for Ukraine. What is the message that the decisions tonight sends to Ukraine, to Russia, to the United States? Is it enough to keep Europe a part of these negotiations?
Yes, no, thank you very much. We will have regular contacts, but there is no proper and formal timeline for the second option because the first one is secured. we took today the decision to issue common loan in order to finance this 90 billion. And the message to Ukraine is the support for the 2 years to come of the European Union. And the fact that we decided to back them in their resistance efforts with this loan. We took our responsibility. We stand with them as we support with our equipment, as we prepare a robust peace with the coalition of the willing, and as we participate to the negotiations with the Americans in what they engaged. So my answer is we delivered what we committed to do to Ukraine. The absence of decision would have been a disaster. Happily, we took a decision, a clear decision, a clear commitment with concrete results. So this summit is a very good one for Ukraine. This is a message of stability, of visibility, and support from the Europeans. And this is vis-à-vis Russia a message of determination sent by the Europeans. Determination because we immobilized the frozen asset a few days ago, and determination because we issued common debt altogether to finance the Ukrainian resistance.